Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning, and welcome to Crosspointe online style. So as you might know by now, we have started back in-person services here in Cary, in addition to the online services that we are continuing to produce. So we are officially in the next phase of this experimentation that has been brought on by a global pandemic. We're years into it now. So I wonder, who's here in this online space? Who are you? Where do you live? Are you local and you just decided not to get up and come to the building this morning? Or do you live in Des Moines or Reykjavik? Is that how you say Reykjavik? We want to know. These are some of the questions that we ask. Who is Crosspointe Online? So if you want to, let us know who you are. Email us at church@crosspoint.org. We'd love to hear from you. Today is Palm Sunday. It's the day we remember Jesus riding on a donkey into the city of Jerusalem, basically marching toward his death. And he tried to tell his friends about it, but they didn't understand. And Jesus experienced the pain of being misunderstood and the derision of the religious and politically powerful, and not to mention physical torture and death, and all the way to the loss of God. We haven't traditionally made much of Palm Sunday at Crosspointe, and in the past that's been, I think, in large part due to the amount of production energy that we've always put into Easter. But I just want to sing about death today. And not even necessarily directly related to Jesus' death, but the everyday deaths that we experience as humans. We're always dying and being reborn in every moment. In fact, you have lost 50 to 100,000 skin cells just since I've been talking. I don't know if you know that. You are a pattern of energy that's constantly recreating itself until ultimately one day the pattern will stop replicating, and the stuff that makes you will begin making or continue making life in other patterns. But even more specifically than that, what about this side of physical death? What I really want to sing about is the metaphoric deaths and losses that we experience while very much alive. The death of a dream, loss of a job, change that's good and necessary, but is so hard to embrace. We cling to what is, even if it's not good, just because familiar is less scary than unknown. Letting go of a toxic relationship with a person or a substance. Letting go of a person who has let go of you. So many examples, and we each have our own. So these next few minutes, I invite you to hold your stories gently as I sing a couple songs for us.
The very walls that kept you safe as a kid in the house where you were raised. They'll turn into a cage. They'll keep you locked inside, fearful of the day. And there's nothing left but believing. Can't you see you're on borrowed time? And looking out, tell me what it is you're dreaming. Love waits for you on the other side. I know it's hard to know just when it's time to step outside the lane that you've been running in. Though painted lines remain, they'll only help you when it's someone else's race. But every season comes to an end, and there's nothing left but believing. Can't you see you're on borrowed time? And looking out, tell me what it is you're dreaming. Love waits for you on the other side. Oh, oh, every season comes to an end. There's nothing left but the leaving. Can't you see you're on borrowed time? And looking out, tell me what it is you're dreaming. Love waits for you on the other side. Looking out, tell me what it is you're dreaming. Love waits for you on the other side.
Jesus said, I tell you the truth. Unless a grain of wheat is planted in the ground and dies, it remains a solitary seed. But when it is planted, it produces in death a great harvest. And then Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen Buddhist monk and teacher that I've been really hanging close to these last few years, he talks about impermanence, and he says it like this: thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. Life itself is possible. If a grain of corn is not impermanent, it can never be transformed into a stalk of corn. It could never provide us with the ear of corn we eat. If your daughter is not impermanent, she cannot grow up to become a woman. So instead of complaining about impermanence, we should say, long live impermanence. I love that joke. Long live impermanence.
Everything alive must die. Every tower built to the sky will fall. But don't try to tell me my everlasting love is a lie. Everlasting, everything. Oh, nothing could mean anything at all. Every book that I adore, gone like the circus, gone like a troubadour. Everlasting love forevermore. Everlasting, everything. Oh, nothing could mean anything at all. Oh, I know this might sound sad, but everything goes, both the good and the bad. It all adds up, so you can be glad. Everlasting love is all you have. Everlasting, everything. Oh, nothing could mean anything at all. Everlasting, everything. Oh, nothing could mean anything at all.
Good morning, Crosspointe. I want to take a few moments to let you know about a few upcoming events happening in our community. It's a little hard to imagine, but next Sunday, April 17th, is Easter. And as always, we're excited to celebrate Easter together. If online is your best option, we'll premiere Easter service next weekend at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, as we do each Sunday, and then it will be available on demand after that. If you're local to the Raleigh-Durham area and you're able to join in person, we're going to be gathering on Crosspointe's campus at 10 a.m. as well. However, as a heads up, while the kids and students will be in their typical locations, we're moving the adult gathering for this one Sunday to the other side of the campus, and we'll be meeting in the YMCA gymnasium. This is going to give us a lot more space and allow us to still gather in one setting Easter morning. Now, if you've never ventured down that way on our campus before, no worries. We're going to have plenty of people there to help point you in the right direction. Now, after Easter, that following week, there's a couple things I want to draw your attention to and make sure you mark down on your calendars if they interest you. One is that on Tuesday night, April 19th at 7:30 p.m., we're going to be hosting online a community conversation around mindfulness, how to live more mindfully and aware in our daily lives. And so if that interests you, make sure to mark that down, April 19th at 7:30 p.m. online. Secondly, we're looking for small group facilitators, both for online and in-person groups. You don't have to have any experience to be involved, just a willingness to facilitate conversations and connect with other people. And so if you're willing to find out more information and explore that possibility, we're having 3 Q&A sessions for potential group leaders. The first 2 options will be online Thursday, April 21st at either 12 or 7 p.m. And then we'll also have an in-person Q&A the following Sunday, April 24th at 11:30 a.m. on Crosspointe's campus. So if you're interested, all you have to do is go to crosspointe.org/groups, where you can get more information and register for any of those 3 options. Then, as always, if you want to partner financially with all that Crosspointe is trying to do in the world to love and serve other people, believing that we can do way more good together when we leverage our generosity together with one another than any of us can do on our own individually, you can go to crosspointe.org/contribute. You'll find ways there that you can contribute via debit or credit cards, check, PayPal, bank transfer, stocks, whatever you want to do. This community does not exist without those of you who choose to fund all that we do together. So thank you. And then lastly, I mentioned a few weeks ago that Crosspointe has partnered with a musical artist, Spencer LaJoy, to record several videos with them of their original music to release out into the world. And Spencer's become a great friend of Crosspointe, and we believe in Spencer's voice and want to be part of lifting it up to as many listeners as possible. And so, several months back, we brought Spencer into town for a few days, and a bunch of different Crosspointe people gave of their time and their skills to record several of their original songs. And so, this weekend, Spencer is releasing another one of them to the public, and we wanted to make sure to share it with all of you. It's a powerful song of lament, but also of hope and remembrance. And however it moves you, I hope you know that by being a part of Crosspointe, you're helping to elevate voices like Spencer's into the world. And so with that, here's the official video release of the song Feast by Spencer LaJoy.
My mother's mother only fed you if she loved you, and she fed everyone. My plate is full, my blood is flowing. If I was eating you or knowing, I would never be gone. I've always finished everything I've started, except a plate of food. I think I got that from my mother. There is always some left over. Guess we're saving it for you. I don't cry 'cause I'm sad. I cry 'cause it's true. Tonight I'll feast for 11 of you. Next week, 22. Raise a glass to all the ones who went before us. We're thinking them alive. I think I read that in some book by someone smarter than I look, by someone who wasn't crying. And we'll try to hold fast. We'll try to be true. Tonight we'll feast for 11 of you. Next week, 22. I don't cry 'cause I'm sad. I cry 'cause it's true. Tonight I'll feast for 11 of you. Next week, 22.
Again, we're really grateful for Spencer's voice. And if you like that song, or you'd like to share it or just watch it again, you can go to YouTube and you can search Spencer LaJoy Feast and find it that way. Or you can find it on one of Crosspointe's social media feeds, and we'll link to it there. Well, I want to do something today that's different than maybe one of our typical Sunday teachings. What I want to do is I want to walk through something that I think is important for who we are collectively. And that hopefully it will serve as sort of a grounding and a compass for what it looks like to move forward together as a community. So for the past couple of years during the pandemic, one of the questions I get asked most often is, so where do you think Crosspointe is going? And that question usually prompts me to ask some clarifying questions to try to discern exactly what they're trying to get at, because people come at that question from all sorts of different angles. But more often than not, it's rooted in this sense of, what do you think this church is going to look like in 5 years or in 10 years? What are your goals? And once again, people tend to have all sorts of expectations of different metrics in their heads that they're hoping I'm able to answer. And to be clear, it's not a bad thing to ask these kinds of questions. It's normal. And frankly, it's flattering when people are genuinely curious and interested in whatever thoughts might be floating around in my head or any of our leaders' heads. But I think one of the reasons that question has been asked so much lately is that we've just been in this long, extended period of deep uncertainty about so many things in our lives and in our world. And that type of uncertainty can be difficult and exhausting because all of us as humans tend to crave certainty. Certainty gives us confidence. It gives us a sense of control. And so as a result, we love certainty. I mean, we crave it. And the reality is, many of us will flock toward people that speak with great confidence and offer us a particular type of certainty. We see that in politics all the time, right? Politicians of every kind often make all sorts of concrete promises on campaign trails to get elected because they know people want to hear certainty. And certainty attracts a certain kind of following. And it doesn't matter if time after time after time those promises fall short once they're elected, because of course they do. Because certainty isn't something that anyone can usually guarantee, but that doesn't really end up affecting whatever politician promised certainty, because they often just end up shifting the blame to someone else, or they make it this person's fault or this group's fault, and they wiggle themselves free of any sort of ownership and accountability. It's just kind of how the system works over and over and over again. Well, unfortunately, the same is true with many faith leaders, where again, what people want is certainty. And understandably, right? I mean, there's so much that's uncertain in the world, and it can be frightening. And we crave the stabilization of certainty. And so people often look to faith leaders to provide them with some of that certainty. And many times the Bible gets used as the foundation for that certainty. It was for me in the church that I grew up in, where it was presented either every single word of this Bible is God-breathed and happened exactly as it says that it did, or none of it's true. There's no in between. And understand, that can be extremely comforting for someone who craves certainty. And what it gave me at a young age was this sense of control. If I hold to this, if I follow this, I can control the outcomes of my life from now through all eternity. But what I wasn't aware of yet at that point in my life is that there is no one universal standard way of interpreting the Bible. That what people actually mean when they present that kind of certainty is that their particular interpretation is what is certain to them. It doesn't matter what bias, baggage, or background they come to the Bible with. It doesn't matter what scholarship knowledge they have or don't have about the original languages and cultural context it was first written in. It doesn't matter if they have any insight into the author's actual agenda and why they wrote what they did at that particular time. Instead, it's just simply, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. And that is seen in many circles as that's what real faith, solid faith looks like. And if that's not how you perceive it, then guess whose fault it is? Well, then it's yours. It's mine, because it's your lack of faith, or the faith leader who led you astray. They get the blame, because that's just how it works with certainty. And so back to the question at hand, when people ask me where I think this church is going in 5 to 10 years, I don't necessarily think they're always looking for certainty, but I do think that they're looking for a clear picture of the future, of where this is all headed and what it's going to look like. So here's the thing. I don't know. And that's because I don't think there's really any way we can know. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can't know. Because there are. There are some things that we can know. And I think those are the things that guide us into the future. Jesus taught this: no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, for each tree is known by its own fruit. Friends, this isn't new, but I want us to always be known by our fruit. This is simple, but listen, we all know an orange tree is an orange tree when we see oranges growing on it, right? And we all know an apple tree is an apple tree when we see apples produced by it. And the same logic holds true if we're a church who follows Jesus, who says absolutely everything boils down to love your neighbor as yourself. Then how we choose to actually love people together gives evidence to who we actually are and what we're up to in the world. Now, people can try to make it a lot more complicated than that, and they often do. Well, how do you interpret this? Or what do you believe about this and this idea and this doctrine and this theology? Listen, that's all good for conversation. But Jesus says, you know a tree by its fruit. And Jesus says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Jesus says, this is how you'll know that you're my students, my followers. And in today's context, this is how you'll know that you're the church, if you love one another. And so about a year ago, we started having some discussion among our leaders that it may be helpful for Crosspointe and for those curious about who we are if we offered some clarity about what we mean when we say that we're about love and how Jesus invites us to live. Because here's the thing, and many of us have experienced this before, where churches will say, or people will say, yes, of course we're supposed to love one another. But one of the ways that we love people is to warn them that they're going to burn in eternal fiery torment forever if they don't do this list of things or believe this list of things or stop doing this, stop doing that, etc. Because to not warn them, to not tell them the truth of their reality of what's to come is the exact opposite of love. So yes, of course, we love people. And so understand, there are tons of people who genuinely think that they are being kind and loving in doing that. They're operating within a paradigm and a framework of interpretation that tells them this is what is most true. And so in their own minds, they sincerely think that what they're doing is loving. And so my goal today is not to try to unpack and critique all the layers of why that is or how that thinking emerged or became popular or try to call out different people or groups. That's not my goal because, again, I think their intentions are very sincere and well-meaning, however misguided that I may think that they are. But instead, I do think it's important that we, as Crosspointe, as this community, offer some clarity on what we mean by love. Not only to guide ourselves, but to make it clear to those curious about our community. Because today, for a church to say that they follow Jesus' teaching to love one another, that can mean vastly different things depending on where they're coming from. And when it's left unclear, it can set someone up with false hopes and expectations and set them up to be in a potentially harmful, unsafe environment. And friends, that's the last thing that we want to do here. Still, let's recognize up front, we can't guarantee certainty. We can't guarantee someone won't ever be disappointed, that the community will meet all their expectations. That's just not realistic. But what we can offer is clarity. Clarity about what we value and how we strive to live out those values. And so again, about a year ago, we as leaders started tossing around what we saw those values being in the Crosspointe community. Not coming up with new ones, but providing clarity on the values we already believed were being lived out among us in this community and that we wanted to make sure to hold on to moving forward. Because to borrow the fruit tree metaphor from Jesus, we don't know how small or big the tree is going to be in the future, where it gets planted or where the seeds of it will get planted. But we want to be clear on the kind of tree that it is, what kind of fruit that we want it producing in the years to come, and let that be the picture that guides us moving forward. And so, what I'd like to do now is walk you through these 12 values. I'm not going to spend much time on each one because the intention is that the statements are pretty clear on their own and self-explanatory. So here's what we've put together. It starts off this way. While acknowledging that all of these values are best discussed in respectful, nuanced conversations within a community that chooses to believe the best about one another's intentions, we're a faith community who. So I want to pause there just for a moment, because we say that up front because these statements do spark questions and the need for conversation. And if any of us think that we can write out a sentence or two and address every question it brings up, we're just delusional. So again, while acknowledging that all of these values are best discussed in respectful, nuanced conversations within a community that chooses to believe the best about one another's intentions, we're a faith community who, value number 1, fully affirms the equality and participation of the entire human family, regardless of race, age, creed, physical abilities, marital or economic status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Now, you've heard this often around our community. Still, sometimes we get the question, well, why do you have to be so specific? Why do you have to name all those categories? Can't we just say we love everyone? And the thing is, in my experience, that question comes from a very well-intentioned place. It's not that someone disagrees necessarily with what we're saying. It's that they know it has the potential to turn off other people before they even get a chance to know our community. And I get that. But the flip side is, and frankly, the more important side is, there's plenty of people who have been hurt and wounded and shamed and shunned by church communities for many of the descriptions that we name here. And if we're not specific, they don't know it's a safe place for them. Some of us have never walked into a church, wondering if it's safe for us or if we belong. And friends, that's privilege. And so the way we do our best to extend that privilege to everyone is to be specific. Here's the second one. We're a faith community who, as necessary, takes sides when issues of human equality and justice are at stake. Back when we were much younger as a church, and in an effort to try to make everyone feel welcome at the table, we used to say things like, well, we don't take sides and we don't take stances because when you take a stand, you stop walking with people. And there's still some wisdom that can be gleaned from ideas like that. But what we've awakened to over more recent years is that when necessary, we will absolutely take sides when issues of human equality and justice are at stake. Because to not take sides in those instances is to not love like Jesus, as we see Jesus time and time again stand on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized. And staying silent or not taking sides in these types of issues only helps to make the oppressor more comfortable, and it does nothing to help those who are actually being oppressed. So, as necessary, we take sides when issues of human equality and justice are at stake. Next, we're a faith community who seeks to be rooted in the teachings and tradition of Jesus, while also being gladly willing to learn from the wisdom of other faith traditions. Okay, here's the thing. We are compelled by Jesus. We're compelled by Jesus' reflection of God's heart and Jesus' vision for what love looks like in the world. We're a church. We strive to be a community that follows Jesus and Jesus' teachings. And it's within the 2,000-year-old Jesus tradition of faith that we ground ourselves in. That's who we are. And it's because of that very same tradition that we also gladly learn from the wisdom of other faith traditions. We're not threatened by them, because this is the same pattern we see in the Bible where followers of Jesus would quote lyrics and wisdom from other religious traditions outside of their own in an effort to better help people connect with the divine. Some of my favorite conversations through the years have been with people from other faith traditions where they'll say something like, well, you know what, in my tradition, this is how our poets and prophets put it. And I respond with, man, that's really interesting. I've never heard it put quite that way before. In my faith tradition, Jesus puts it this way. And in the end, we both felt like we were more connected to each other and more connected to God, because here's the bottom line. If it's wisdom, regardless of where it originates. And we shouldn't ever be scared or threatened by wisdom because it may come from a different tradition. Rather, all it does is expand and give more helpful layers to the wisdom in our own tradition. If God is the source of all that's true, there's no reason to be threatened when truth shows itself, because it's from God, regardless of what label gets put on it. All right, let's keep going. We're a faith community who discusses honestly the collection of the sacred literature in the Bible within all its various genres and historical, cultural, literary contexts, and tries to find our stories in the stories preserved there. The thing about the Bible is that it's a tremendous gift. To have a collection of all different kinds of writings from over a 1,500-year span of people seeking to follow God, wrestling with what that looked like in their own time and place, that's a gift and a treasure. But it's not something we were ever asked to put our faith in. It's not an object of worship. Rather, we get to be inspired by it and learn from it, but we also get to critique and wrestle with it as we figure out what it looks like to follow God and live out God's heart that we see in Jesus in our own time and place today. That's our collective invitation. The Bible isn't intended to handcuff us to the past, but rather to be a springboard of wisdom and discussion of how we best live out the tradition of love today. And so, we have a responsibility to handle the Bible well and not place expectations on it that it was never intended to carry. Here's another value. We're a faith community who believes that Jesus' core teaching of love your neighbor as yourself should be the core of all we do. Now, I think trying to add anything onto that one probably defeats the purpose of what we've written. Not because it answers every question, it just reminds us that asking what does it look like to love our neighbor as ourselves is the central question in all we do. So I'm just going to let that one stand on its own. Next, we're a faith community who compassionately accepts that we've all been shaped by different belief traditions and context, and that we must provide safe spaces for each of us to embark on a journey of growth, while also not tolerating the promotion of toxic theological ideas that measurably harm others. Here's the thing. We're a melting pot of people from all sorts of different backgrounds and all sorts of different experiences when it comes to our interaction with faith traditions and church. And for some, the majority of those experiences are filled with positive, joyous memories. For others, the majority of those experiences are filled with pain and trauma. And then, for still others, it's a mixture all over the map and all in between on that spectrum. Furthermore, wherever any of us fall on that spectrum of experiences, many of us have deeply ingrained ideas about God, faith, and the Bible that were handed to us by authorities in our lives that we deeply love and respect. And so to even entertain the possibility of potentially seeing things differently feels like, that's important, but it feels like a rejection of those that first handed us those ideas. And so something about that feels very wrong. Doesn't mean that it is wrong, but it feels very wrong. And so as we strive to learn and grow together as a community, we have to make it a priority for people to go on their own journeys at their own pace. Because again, we all have context that have shaped us. But as we do that, and this is key, we can't tolerate ideas about faith that we know measurably harm others. Because here's one of the things we've learned over the past 17 years. To be a safe and loving, inclusive community means that you also have to exclude some things. And so, for example, if someone wants to promote a viewpoint to kids or to students or to adults that doesn't honor and affirm the innate beauty and worth of every human being, regardless of things like race, age, creed, physical abilities, marital, economic status, gender identity, or sexual orientation, then that person doesn't get a platform in our community to express those viewpoints. Because again, those ideas measurably hurt people. And so this is a tension that we have to manage and love, where all of us are allowed space to grow and mature and wake up to better ways of living out love in this world, while also not giving any value or platform for ideas that cause harm to vulnerable people. And so we don't stay silent in the face of them, but rather we confront them in love for the sake of the kind of community we want to be. In that similar spirit, here's another value. We're a faith community who rejects in our teaching the idea of eternal bodily torture in a place called hell, as it is counter to love and remarkably never found in Jesus' teachings. Now, we've done an entire teaching on this topic that you can find in one of our past series, Weapons and Balm, and you can find it on our website or find it on YouTube. But the bottom line is, the vast majority of imagery and ideas in our modern context around hell come from a 14th century poem, Dante's Inferno, not the Bible. The original Greek word that Jesus uses that modern English translators call hell is the word Gehenna, which was an actual geographical location outside of Jerusalem that everyone Jesus was talking to knew at the time they knew about. They knew where it was. They could point to it. And it was a place that had significant context to the history of the Israelite people. And another Greek word that sometimes gets translated as hell is the word Hades, which was a Greek mythological idea that they used to describe the place of the dead. Not the condemned, but the dead. Whether you were viewed as righteous or unrighteous, good or bad, Hades was simply the realm of the dead in ancient Greek thought. And so we understand the rejection of that idea can be unsettling for some. And some even ask, well, then what's the point? I mean, what's the point of faith? What's the point of following Jesus then? And in short, what I'll say is that when we ask that question, we do so mainly because many of us have been handed a view of faith and following Jesus that, when it all boils down, is primarily a means to an end to avoid being tortured forever. It's a fear-based life rather than a love-driven life. But when we take Jesus up on his actual invitation to participate in living out a community of love, generosity, and grace and inclusion, and helping to restore justice where there is injustice, and to partner with God and with each other to bring healing and resurrection to all that is broken, then we can wake up to what's actually real and the life right in front of us now. Because the thing is, if something is actually good and beautiful, you don't ever have to threaten people. Instituting a threat by logic implies that you don't actually think whatever you're trying to point people to is as good as you say that it is. Okay, next value. We're a faith community who doesn't align with partisan politics, but will actively speak out and work against injustices and systems that oppress people and creation. Sometimes we get the critique, please don't talk about politics. Just leave politics out of discussion. Just teach the Bible. But friends, here's the thing. One of the things that we've learned through the years is that that's such a privileged point of view. Because politics, at its most basic definition, is about how we go about ordering and arranging our collective lives as we live in a community together. You see, politics is a good and necessary thing. And when it comes to how we arrange our lives together, if we're a community that cares about love, about equality, about standing against injustice, what good does it do if we stay silent on how we treat one another in the broader collective community? Now, unfortunately for many people today, the primary lens through which they view how we live together in this nation and on this planet is through the lens of a particular political party or a particular cable news network. But listen, that is not the lens we are trying to lead through. We are trying to lead through the lens of what Jesus calls the kingdom of God, asking, what does love best look like here? And so, to be clear, we don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, a libertarian, whatever partisan group you want to align with. As Crosspointe, we don't align with any of those. We recognize and believe that the tension between those different perspectives, when handled respectfully, can be very good and helpful as we collectively try to come to the best and most wise decision for the whole. But again, we actively speak out and work against injustices and systems that oppress people and creation, regardless of which partisan group may be supporting them. And to be clear, obviously we can't publicly address every single one, but we do want to always be listening and learning, and as leaders trying to discern when we speak as a united collective voice on a particular issue. And for what it's worth, as a faith community, we will often feel compelled to speak up when someone uses the Bible or the name of Jesus or the Christian faith to justify their particular oppression of others. We see that as using God's name in vain, as anti-Jesus. And so, as leaders in a faith community, we often feel a particular responsibility to clarify that for people so that they don't assume that just because we're followers of Jesus, we're affirming whatever injustice is happening when people claim it in the name of Jesus. Now, I think these last 4 values don't need much commentary, so I'm just going to offer them without any further context. But we're a faith community who values music and artful expressions as ways to both inspire and challenge our normal paradigms and help us emotionally connect with all and each other. We're a faith community who embraces science as a tool of discovering truth and for adding to rather than taking away from our sense of wonder. We're one who believes that curiosity, questions, and doubts are all necessary in an authentic faith journey. And lastly, number 12, we're a faith community who humbly and thoughtfully changes its mind with better understanding, knowing that doing so carefully and with grace is far better for us all than the stubborn refusal to see things anew. So there you go. 12 values that we think mark and guide this Crosspointe community. Now again, I'm not certain what this community is going to look like in the next year, 5 years, or 10 years. But what I do have clarity about is that these are the values that will help shape and form whatever we become. And I'm very confident if we allow these values to continue to shape all of us, it will be something beautiful and it will do really good things in the world. Now, a couple last thoughts and we'll wrap this up. The hope is that this community doesn't just exist as one more content creator in the vast sea of content creators, where for those of us who come in person or for those of us who participate online, where we can just consume content, but rather it would be a community that we engage with, that we participate with, that we put our hearts and minds together with to live out these kind of values in the world. Because here's the thing, I really do think each of us need community. We need people. We need a group to belong to and to have purpose with. And in saying that, I'm not saying Crosspointe is the only solution for that. There's countless great options, I'm sure. But it is one solution. And know that it's not a perfect one. We're not even trying to be that. But I do believe it's a healthy one. And one that I'm really proud to be a part of, and I hope you are too. But here's another thing. I don't just think that we need this kind of community. I think there's a lot of hurting people in the world who need to know a community like this can and does exist. That it can be possible, whether they ever participate or not. That they can know a safe, loving, inclusive community of people exists in the world, one that cares about equality and justice for all people, that cares about loving their neighbor as themselves and is willing to give generously to live out those purposes together. The name church or community of Jesus followers has been hijacked in our world. And at a cultural level, it's not generally associated with good news for all people. It's not associated with hope. It's not associated with kindness and equality. And to be honest, I don't have any notion that our little community of people can turn that global reputation around. But I do think we can be associated with those things. We can lean in together against the stereotypes and live out a different, much more beautiful story together, both in our little corners of the interwebs across the globe and here in Raleigh-Durham. And that's what I hope for us, because I think it's good for us and for the world. Now, if you weren't able to write fast enough or screenshot fast enough, you can find all these values on Crosspointe's website today on our About page. If they're helpful to you, feel free to use them however you like. But as we close today, what I want to do is create a few moments of space where we can reflect on how each of us can live out at least a couple of these values in our day-to-day lives. But these aren't values for just when we gather online or attend a gathering of some kind, but these are values we're invited to strive to live out in our homes, in our neighborhoods, schools, offices, sports fields, wherever we find ourselves. And so we're going to create some space with some music, and we're going to scroll through the values on the screen again. And if you want more time, again, go to crosspointe.org/about on your phone or your computer, and you can see the list of values there. And what I want to invite you to do is just take a few moments and think about, how can I embody these values this coming week? How can they show up in my own actions? So let's take a few moments and do that together.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.